Have you ever been in a situation you can't explain what's happening? Or maybe you've heard a knock at the door late at night, a knock you know you weren't expecting. Some fears are easy to forget once the sun rises, but others, they stay with you. They linger in the shadows of your mind, because sometimes it's not your mind playing tricks on you. Sometimes something really is out there. Tonight I'm going to tell you a story that might make you rethink every late night call, every shadow in your front yard, and every quiet knock on your door. By the end of this video, you'll be double-checking your locks and maybe even staring a little longer out your window. Because once you hear these 3 stories, you'll never feel alone in the same way again. I'm a 25-year-old guy named Ethan, and in the summer of 2023, I found myself renting a small cabin on the outskirts of Maple Hollow, Oregon. My dad and I had been clashing for months, and I decided it was time to get some space. The guy who actually leased the cabin, Sam, was dealing with his own problems and needed to leave town for a while. We worked out a month-to-month agreement, which suited my uncertain situation perfectly. The cabin was small but cozy, a single-bedroom unit with a compact kitchen, a modest living area, and a lofted bedroom accessible by a short, steep staircase. The only way to close off the bedroom was with a quirky hatch-style door that didn't have a lock. It was weird but functional, so I didn't think much of it. The cabin sat at the end of a bumpy dirt road, surrounded by thick woods. There were a few other cabins down the road, but I didn't see much activity from the neighbors. One house seemed abandoned, no lights, no cars. The other homes had cars out front sometimes, but I never met any of the people living there. After a month of living there, I'd settled into a routine. I worked 12-hour shifts as a delivery driver, and by the time I got home, I'd be too exhausted to do anything but eat and crash. One night, after a long shift, I made a quick peanut butter and jelly sandwich, drank a protein shake, and headed up to bed. As usual, I closed the hatch door leading to the bedroom. I've never liked sleeping with an open doorway. It's like something primal in my brain tells me it's not safe. I was half watching TV, half dozing off when I heard it, a man's voice coming from below. "Who's up there?" It wasn't loud, but it was clear. My heart stopped. I sat up so fast my head spun. It sounded like it came from inside the cabin, not outside. I quickly grabbed the TV remote and muted it, straining to listen. I'm not sure why, but I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. I crawled to the small round window at the end of the loft. I scanned the tree line but didn't see anyone. I told myself it was probably just a neighbor, maybe someone outside yelling, but I still felt uneasy. My fingers hovered over the latch of the hatch door. I'd never felt more aware of how flimsy it was. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me. I lifted the hatch and peeked down. "Dad, is that you?" I'm not sure why I said that. Wishful thinking, maybe. No answer. I'm not the kind of person to brush off weird sounds, so I went downstairs, turning on every light as I went. I'd expected to see someone, a shadow, a figure, something, but there was nothing. I flicked on the porch light and scanned the front yard. No cars, no movement, just crickets and the soft hum of distant frogs. I felt stupid but still rattled. I'm not superstitious, but something about being in the woods alone messes with your head. I checked the door locks twice, went back upstairs, and shut the hatch harder than necessary. I'd barely made it back into bed when it started again. Bam, bam, 3 heavy knocks on the bottom of the hatch. I'd never felt terror like that in my life. It wasn't random tapping, it was deliberate, angry pounding. My breathing stopped. My heart was hammering in my chest. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe. The only light was the soft glow from the TV screen, flickering dim blues and whites on the walls. I'm not sure how long I stayed like that. It felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes. The knocks didn't come back, and eventually I convinced myself that I'd imagined it. I reached for my phone, wanting to text a friend, but it wasn't on the nightstand. I'd left it in my car. Of course. I sat there, staring at the hatch. I'd have to go downstairs to get my phone, but I'd have to open that door. I hated every part of this idea, but I'd seen enough horror movies to know that ignoring something like this never ends well. So I slowly unlatched the hatch, one hand gripping it tightly like I was bracing for something to pull it open from the other side. Nothing. Just the flickering light of the TV shining down the stairs. I crept down step by step, keeping my eyes locked on every shadow in the room. When I reached the bottom, I didn't even bother with the light switch. I bolted for the front door, ran barefoot to my car, yanked it open, and grabbed my phone from the console. I'm not proud of it, but I stayed in the car. I'm not sure how long I sat there, phone clutched in my hands. The only reason I didn't call the cops was that I didn't want to seem paranoid. But then I glanced up at the cabin's rear window. There was someone inside. A man sitting on my bed, his back to me, staring at the TV. I froze. He slowly turned his head, and even from the driveway I could tell he was looking right at me. I've never moved faster in my life. I'm talking locked my car doors, dialed 911, and put the engine in reverse fast. My hands were shaking so badly that I'm surprised I didn't stall the car. Someone's in my house, I told the dispatcher. He's upstairs, in my bedroom, and I'm outside in my car. She told me to stay on the line and stay in my car. I'd already made that decision myself. As I'm sitting there, I see movement near the tree line. A figure walking casually into the woods. No rush, just walking. I told the dispatcher, and she said officers were on the way. A cruiser pulled up 10 minutes later, and I've never felt more relieved. 2 officers went inside while I stayed in the car. When they came back, they told me they didn't find anyone, but they believed me. "Do you have somewhere else to stay tonight?" one of them asked. I nodded. "Yeah, my dad's." It wasn't the night for pride. I went back the next day, grabbed my things, and left for good. Sam, the guy who rented me the place, didn't ask for details. He refunded some of my rent and didn't ask why I'd left early. Looking back, I'm sure he knew something about that house, something he wasn't telling me. The creepy neighbor who'd stared at me from his window. The sudden need for Sam to leave town, it all felt connected. But I'll never know, and I'm okay with that. My name is Aaron, and I'm just an ordinary guy living in a quiet suburb in Candler Heights with my wife, Maria. We're both 32, work 9 to 5 jobs, and spend most evenings at home watching TV or reading. Life here is peaceful, or at least it used to be. It's not like me to write out a story like this. Honestly, I'm not much of a writer. The last time I wrote something this long was probably for a final paper in college. But something happened about a week ago, and I can't stop thinking about it. I'm hoping that putting it into words will help me make sense of it. It was a Thursday night, and everything about the day had been normal. Work, dinner, and then we decided to treat ourselves to burgers at Phil's Grill. We got back around 8:45. By 9:30, we'd both showered, and we're getting ready for bed. Usually we're in bed by 10 and lights out by 11. Some nights we read, other nights we'll watch whatever show we're binging. That night it was a show. Around 10:15, the landline rang. Yeah, we've still got one of those old phones that's mounted on the kitchen wall. It's a piece of junk, but we've kept it just in case our cellarist goes, I remember Maria saying, "Don't answer it. Anyone calling at this hour isn't bringing good news." She's usually right about that, but something told me to check it. I reached for the phone, but it stopped ringing just as I touched it. The caller ID had already disappeared. The phone's too old to store a call log. Probably a wrong number, I thought. We went back to our show. Not 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. I glanced at Maria, and she raised an eyebrow. "What's calling this late?" she muttered. This time I checked the screen. It said unknown caller. I didn't answer. Calls from unknown numbers past 10 p.m. give me a bad feeling. The ringing stopped, and we looked at each other, both unsettled but trying to brush it off. Then it rang again. 3 times in a row now. This time I picked it up. "Hello?" I said, bracing for bad news. "Aaron, do you know the guy standing in front of your house?" It was Ben, our neighbor from across the street. His voice was low and direct. "What? What guy?" I asked, my heart already starting to race. "Go look," he said. And then the line went dead. I stood there for a second, trying to process what he'd just said. Maria's face went pale when I told her. "Don't go out there," she said. I told her I'd just check from the window. I walked downstairs to the living room and moved the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The porch light cast a soft glow over the front yard, but there was no one there. I stepped outside, opening both the front door and the storm door. The chilly night air hit me, and I scanned the yard and the street. I even checked the bushes in front of the house. Nothing. No one. "Ben's messing with us," I told Maria when I got back upstairs. She shook her head, confused. It didn't seem like Ben's style. He's not really the prankster type. She told me to call him, so I did. It rang once before going straight to voicemail. I left a message. "Hey, Ben, what's going on? Give me a call back." Then the phone rang again. Unknown caller. I picked it up, more annoyed than anything. "Hello?" "Aaron, go outside," Ben's voice said. But this time it was slow and deliberate. "There's someone standing in front of your house." My heart dropped. "Ben?" I asked, but he'd already hung up. Maria's eyes were locked on me. I could tell she'd heard the voice. "What's happening?" she asked. "Indrisi one taste." "I'm checking again," I said, grabbing my hoodie and heading downstairs. This time when I peeked through the curtain, I saw him. He was standing at the edge of our walkway where it meets the sidewalk. A man, or at least the shape of a man, with a hood pulled low over his face. I couldn't see his eyes. It was just darkness where his face should be. I'm not the confrontational type, but something about just standing there watching filled me with anger. I opened the front door and shouted, "Hey, can I help you?" He didn't move, not even a flinch. "I'm calling the police," I yelled, stepping back into the house and slamming the door. Then the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID said Ben. I picked it up. "Ben, seriously, what's going on?" "What are you talking about, man?" he asked, sounding genuinely confused. "You've called me 3 times about some guy outside. I see him now. What's the deal?" Silence. Then, "Aaron, I haven't called you. I'm sitting on the couch with Rachel. We're watching TV." He put Rachel on the phone to confirm. "We've been here the whole time," she said. "We didn't call." I felt a wave of cold wash over me. "You're telling me you didn't just tell me to check outside? Twice?" "No, man. I'm looking at your house right now. I don't see anyone." I'd had enough. I told Ben to stay on the line while I checked the window again. I pulled the curtain back, my heart pounding. The man in the hood was gone. "He's gone," I told Ben. "I'm not crazy. I'm telling you he was just there." "I believe you, man," he said, though I'm not sure he really did. We both sat in silence on the line for a moment, listening to each other's breathing. Finally, we said goodnight and hung up. That was a week ago. Every night since, I've checked the window before bed. I've stopped answering calls from unknown caller. Maria's been double-locking the doors. We're not paranoid people, at least we weren't before, but something's different now. Sometimes I'll glance out the window, expecting to see him. So far, I haven't. But that's the thing about fear. It's not just about what you see, it's about what's just out of sight. It was the summer of my 16th year, and my mom, my 20-year-old sister, and I were driving across the country on a road trip that promised to be an adventure. We had been driving for hours, the steady hum of the tires on the road our only companion. The trip had been fun up until that point. We'd passed through countless small towns and roadside attractions, each one leaving us with stories to tell when we finally made it to our destination. We were well rested, excited, and alert, taking turns behind the wheel to make sure no one got too fatigued. But that night, something shifted. We were on an interstate that stretched out for miles, the road practically empty at that hour. The sky was a deep indigo with the stars spread out like glitter across the heavens. The highway stretched out ahead, illuminated only by the beams of our headlights, and the air was thick with a sense of isolation you can only find on long stretches of road. We had been driving for hours without a single rest stop, and the need for gas and a bathroom break was becoming urgent. As we approached a small cluster of lights in the distance, I spotted a gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was the only one for over 200 miles, so we decided to stop. The station was small, with a few gas pumps and a building that seemed to be made of corrugated metal. It didn't look like much, but we were relieved to finally have a place to stretch our legs. We pulled up to one of the pumps, and I noticed something strange right away. There was a van full of teenagers, probably about our age, parked nearby. They were gathered around the pump, laughing and chatting, but they looked jittery, as if something was off. At the front of the station, a small gray car was parked at a pump, and 2 young men were standing outside of it. They were just standing there, perfectly still, not talking to each other, not looking at their phones, just staring ahead into the darkness. I felt a strange unease creeping up my spine, something I couldn't explain. We had stopped at many rest stops on this trip, often much later at night, but none of them had ever felt like this. None had felt wrong like this one did. My mom and sister got out of the car and made their way to the building to use the restrooms, while I stayed in the car. It was cooler outside, but the air still felt heavy, as though it carried a warning with it. I rolled down the window slightly, trying to shake the uncomfortable feeling, but I couldn't seem to get rid of it. I watched the van full of teenagers who were now clustered together by the door of the station, looking around nervously. One of the teens, a girl with long blonde hair, turned to her friends and said something I couldn't quite hear. I strained my ears, but the only sound that reached me was the low hum of the gas pump. Then I heard her louder, more clearly. "Something's not right. I can't get the pump to work. I don't like it here." Her voice was shaky, and the tension was clear in her tone. One by one, the group started to back away from the pumps. They exchanged anxious looks, gathered their things, and without another word, they left in a hurry, peeling out of the parking lot and disappearing into the night. I was still watching the gray car and the two men standing next to it. They hadn't moved at all, not 1 inch. They were perfectly still, their faces expressionless, as if they were statues. Their bodies weren't even slightly shifting in the breeze. It was as if they had become part of the landscape, frozen in time. My stomach tightened, and I felt a strange, pressing feeling in the pit of my stomach. What were they doing? Why were they just standing there? It was then that my mom and sister came running back to the car. They were visibly shaken, their faces pale. I quickly unlocked the doors for them, and they jumped into the car, their breaths quick and shallow. "Let's go," my mom said, her voice trembling. "What happened?" I asked. "Something's wrong here," my sister replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We couldn't get the bathroom door to open. It felt off, like the air inside was wrong. I couldn't breathe in there." My mom nodded, her face tight with anxiety. "We need to go, now." As they settled into the car, the two men outside the gray car slowly turned to look at us. They didn't move their bodies at all. It was as though their heads had rotated by some unnatural force, but their torsos remained perfectly still. Their eyes, I will never forget their eyes. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But no. I could see it clearly, the deep black voids that were their eyes. They weren't reflecting any light, not a hint of a glint or shine. There was nothing there. Not even the darkness of a pupil or the shimmer of an iris. It was as if their eyes were empty, hollow. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. My mom slammed the car into drive, and we sped out of there, not stopping until we were in the next city, a good hour and a half away. The night had fallen eerie silent, and the only sounds were the hum of the car engine and our own ragged breaths. It wasn't until we reached the safety of a brightly lit gas station in the city that we allowed ourselves to truly relax. But even then, the sense of dread lingered. We couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching us, waiting for us to leave. The worst part, when we tried to find the gas station on the map the next day, it didn't exist. We knew exactly where it had been. We remembered the exit we took, the landmarks we passed, and the stretch of road. But when we looked at Google Maps or pulled out the paper map, there was no gas station in that area, no rest stop, no sign of the place at all. We even asked locals in the nearby towns, but every person we spoke to gave us a confused look. They'd never heard of a gas station on that stretch of road. We couldn't believe it. How could it just vanish?